My name is Elizabeth Willing. I'm a local Brisbane artist. My work focuses around food and hospitality as its primary themes. I create sculpture, installation, performance, video, lots of different kinds of work. Typically though, I work to a concept. Sometimes my work is participatory and multisensory. For the Artist Gallery, I have selected artworks from the QAGOMA collection that I feel have some relationship to the alimentary canal, so the space between the mouth and the colon. So the organs such as the esophagus or the intestines or the stomach. I've tried to mine the collection and find works that I feel might directly or indirectly relate to those forms. Beyond simply thinking about the form of the alimentary canal, I've also tried to see whether there's a way of interpreting the processes and actions that those organs go through, whether it's chewing or masticating food in the mouth and breaking it down, or churning or blending food inside the stomach and then moving it around the body. So those sorts of actions can hopefully be seen in some of the works as well. There's a lot of unseen processes that happen as we eat food. We're sort of welcoming food inside the body and hosting it inside of us. And there's these processes that go on inside of our gut, and the way that the body moves it around through this kind of almost rhizome of the intestine is really fascinating. I'm hoping with the Artist Gallery, but also with the Open Studio, that there's an opportunity to talk about the creative process in relation to that. So the digestion in terms of the body, breaking things down and reworking them and using parts of it is very familiar to the creative process, in that we welcome ideas and we work with materials and we transform materials, and then we get rid of things that don't work. I think that there's some correlation between those two things, and hopefully the works in the Artist Gallery can touch on those ideas. A significant part of my practice is making collage with cookbooks. That's a very manual process of cutting and pasting and creating 2D works. But I also have a practice of making wallpapers, which are sort of like digital collages, which can be repeated and integrated into spaces, installations, and architecture. In this instance, I was lucky to be able to work with the Queensland Museum. They have some incredible objects in their collection which are taken from the mouths and throats of different animals, but also items that are regurgitated or from the guts of animals, such as bezoars or regurgitated matter, grinding plates, things like that. I was also fortunate to be able to use a professional photographer from QAG to photograph the incredible level of detail in these objects. The wallpaper is made with the digital images from Queensland Museum, and I've kind of reworked it into a repetitive design that can fit different spaces. Bringing these photos together, I kind of wanted to create something that was quite decorative, quite ornate, which contrasts the objects that we use to photograph, with them being kind of maybe associated with the internal body, which is a little bit maybe more grotesque, and turning them into something that is not only ornate but also quite sweet and feels a bit like something like confection. So there's a heavy transformation process that goes on with those images, and that in some ways feels also like digesting those images into something new. Creating a mind map for the gallery was a way of sharing a process that is really familiar to my practice and that's really helpful in sorting out my ideas and my research. Creating a mind map that is more representative of the creative process, touching on these three main points at the center of the mind map, almost at the gut of the mind map: materials, process, and display, and then fleshing those ideas out and drawing out the really important facets of those three things, and allowing it to become a large kind of rhizome that you can follow through in different pathways to discover some of the ways that my mind works and some of the links and connections that my mind has created over the years that end up as artworks. And that's why some of the images in this mind map will show different experiments or artworks directly from the studios, kind of around the periphery of that large mind map. The timeline in the space is a slightly different way of thinking about the creative process. It's certainly not something that I would do, create timelines of work, but naturally in my diaries, I document works throughout years. I start with a really rough idea and then I gradually develop it, research it, collaborate with people to finesse it. And it might be 2 years, it might be 8 years until an artwork finally makes it into the real world. And I guess with the artist studio, it was a nice opportunity to explore the creative process for the audience. To say these tables actually started about 5 years ago as a small sketch in my diary, and they developed in this way. Above the timeline, there's these sketches that I've pulled from my diary and scanned in. And then below the line of the timeline, there's some of the subconscious things that were going on in my mind in those years when I was developing the works. And I've always known that your environment and what's going on in your mind affects the way that you create art, but it wasn't actually until I made this timeline for the Open Studio that it was so apparent how much artworks are not only influenced by your research, but by what's happening in your life as well. When I was creating the Open Studio, I was thinking a lot about hospitality and hosting and the experience of the audience coming into that space. The tables are really important for that. I wanted the space to feel like it was welcoming audiences in. I also really enjoy that people will be not quite sure if these are artworks and that they'll have to question a little bit about whether they can interact with it and how they can interact with it. The storage in the Open Studio will give an audience a good sense of how diverse my practice is as a contemporary artist. It's a portrait of the kinds of ways that I work, from timber carving through ceramics, drawing, painting, printing. There's so many different objects in those shelves. And so I want people to explore those objects, maybe try and figure out how they fit in their overall scheme of the practice, and link them in with the other, the mind map wall and the timeline, and see how these tools and objects make sense in the context of the exhibition. Apart from it being a working space, I also wanted the space to feel quite welcome and for people to come in and feel like they could sit down and spend some time. And so the tables are designed to be both an artwork hung on the wall, like a painting, but they're also assembled in the space so people can sit and spend time. In that way, the work tries to enact a kind of hospitality. The Open Studio is a working space. It's a place where I will be coming to work like I would in my studio. So I'll be doing some printing throughout the course of the exhibition, and that will generate work. It's also a sort of mock-up of storage space. So because my practice is so diverse in the media that I work with, I have so many tools and materials, and also finished artworks, design objects that need storage. So what I've tried to do is bring in a smattering of these materials for the audience to see. The tables offer a kind of hospitality to audiences who can come in and spend time in the space, somewhere to sit. But thinking about hosting, it's also a space that hosts me. The gallery is hosting me as a resident. I'm there to make work. It's a space that's hosting the objects from my studio, and this notion of the gut or digestion, a kind of hospitality or hosting that happens internally, also permeates the works in the show and the way that I'm thinking about the creative process.